After doing that engine timing, I've noticed that the idle is a little bit smoother. It's doing a little better. The startups feel a little bit better as well. I'm able to give it less gas for less time to get it to settle to a sustainable idle without kind of petering out. So I'm excited about the changes that that little timing adjustment made. However, I do still feel some irregularities when I'm idling. It's still struggling and sort of got this like womp 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 that's happening with the idle when it's low. And so when we were sort of diagnosing that issue, one thing I did was pull one of the spark plugs, and I noticed a little bit of rust on it. And so I think that I'm gonna go ahead and change all 8 spark plugs on this engine anyway. And really, it's not a very expensive fix, and it can't hurt. Um, I've never done it before, so it should be fun. It sounds like it's pretty straightforward, but it'll be a learning experience either way. And my hope for having changed all the spark plugs is that we end up with an even smoother idle, just smoother running. So there's a couple of steps we're gonna go through. Let's get after it. Here are the materials I'm going to be using. I have a couple of just regular old spark plugs. There are 8 here since I have 8 cylinders in this engine, so we'll replace all of them at once. Just a couple of different sizes spark plug sockets for my socket set, just to allow us to get around the entire spark plug. And there's a little rubber boot inside of these that'll help protect the ceramic from getting cracked as we're doing our install, and then a spark plug gap gauge. So I did some looking up online, and it sounds like I want to double check these spark plugs to make sure they're gapped to 0.045 inches. So that's what I'm going to use this for. I'm not sure what they come from factory, so maybe that they're close, but either way, in transit, if this box were knocked around side to side, there's a chance that they could have gotten gapped tighter, or maybe they came too wide from factory. So we'll go ahead and let's start by gapping each of these spark plugs. So here's one of our new spark plugs, and I just want to run through the basics of what I've learned about these. So this white part here is ceramic, and its purpose is to be an insulator. So here we have a metal electrode part that's actually going to come in contact, I guess, with our spark plug wire. It's going to send a signal at just the right moment through this piece that runs basically the full length of the body, and that will cause this little tip, this puck-looking thing here, has copper inside it, and it'll cause an arc to happen between that and this little ground piece here. And so that's where our spark actually happens, is between these two. This faces down into the cylinder where there's a mixture of gas and air. This little spark happens between, it ignites and forces the piston back down, which is where, how we power our engine. So obviously this ceramic insulation is important because we don't want other electrical signals either coming in and causing a spark at the wrong moment, or what should have caused our spark to sort of leak out the side so we don't get a spark. Either of those situations could lead to misfiring, which is maybe what's happening in the engine. It might be that I have some cracked ceramic on one of my spark plugs. It could be that there's rust. It could be that these gaps have just gotten totally out of whack. They deteriorate over time. They start to get eroded away. So who knows what's wrong with the ones in there right now, other than the one I saw had some rust on it. But we'll find out as we pull them. So anyway, that's the basics of how this really basic spark plug works. So what I need to do is check that this gap between the puck and this little electrode here is 0.045 inches. And I'm going to do that using this spark plug gapping gauge. So you'll see on the side, it starts out really thin, and as you rotate around, this gets thicker and thicker. And there are also these markings here that tell you what portion of an inch you have. And so I'm going to put this at the very thin end and just rotate it gently until I feel a little bit of resistance. And so right about there is where this feels like it wants to stick. So we're somewhere just over 0.04 inches. So this is actually not very far off. What I found online was I want these gapped to 0.045. And so I want to open this one up just a bit. And that's actually what this hole is for. So I'm going to put that electrode, I want to bend this outward. So I'm going to put it onto there and sort of like a can opener. I'm just going to bend with my hand a little bit. So I probably opened it too much there, is my guess. It opened easier than I thought it would. So if we check, the new gap right now is really just, there's where it's snug. Just over, it's like 0.055, right? So I need to close this up a little bit, and to do that, I'm just going to use the back of this tool and press it shut a bit. Let's see if I made any adjustment there now. Did not close it very much, so let's try one more time. So it's gotten a little smaller, but still it's too large. So let's keep going. All right, after a little bit of trying, you can see that I got this first one gapped right where I want it. So I feel some resistance right there at 0.045 inches is where it seems to stick. So this is one of our 8 spark plugs that is now properly gapped. So I'm going to set it aside, knowing for myself that it's properly gapped, and go through to repeat the same exact process. All right, just a few minutes later, I've got all of these gapped to the same amount. Now I said 0.045. I think I may have been reading this based on the wrong edge. So I think I was reading based on the trailing edge instead of the leading edge. So they may be closer to 0.048. But honestly, I'm more concerned with them all being identical to one another, so I get consistent spark from cylinder to cylinder. And I think that that small of a difference is going to be okay. They are going to change over time anyway. So these have all been gapped, and we're ready to go in the car. So now that all 8 spark plugs have been gapped properly, I pulled from that little kit of 3 spark plug pullers that I had. I found that the 5/8 one is the one that fits these spark plugs. And so this is just like a normal long socket. However, if you can see inside there, it has a little rubber boot at the end. And that's to protect, I'll show you how this works, but that's to protect the spark plug during installation, and it also helps. The reason this little rubber boot is so useful is that it allows me to, I can sort of insert my spark plug that I want to go in, just sort of clicks into place. It's holding on and allowing me to fasten it down or pull one out when it's no longer threaded. So it gives me a little grip where I can actually hold inside of here a spark plug that's been released from the car to pull it out. The old ones, that'll be useful for. But it also, that little bit of rubber is it just came right out in my hand actually, unfortunately. So that little bit of rubber is protecting this fragile ceramic, because if that gets cracked, the spark plug has to be replaced. It's no good. So I don't want to break these on install. That's why I'm glad to have that little insert. Let's see if we can spot. I see that little blue wire is a spark plug wire. You can see coming from our distributor up here, a spark plug wire. So I know they're blue. They're only blue wires under here. So underneath here, I can see there's one of them, and I don't think I can get it. You maybe can see a little bit of it just beneath this part right there. So I can spot 2 on this side, but of course, each side of this V8 should have 4 spark plugs, and I'm sure there are more, but I can't see them from above. So what I think I'm gonna do is jack the car up and get a look at it from underneath. Now, I haven't jacked this car up before, and so that'll be an adventure of its own. I also have a floor jack I haven't used yet, so I'm excited to see what that process looks like. So here's what was inside that jack stand box. We've got some instructions, which I'll take a look at. This is sort of our lever, so that's got a little notch at the end that's going to slide into here and then over to the side to keep it in place. That's what I'm going to use for leverage to actually operate the jack, to pull it up, and then eventually to release the pressure and let it down. And then here's our jack itself. So it's got a wheel on each side at the front end to roll it under the car. And then this is the point that's actually going to make contact with the frame of the car. Over here is sort of where our lever action is going to happen to operate the jack. It's a nice sunnier day, less water on the ground, less annoying to lay down and get underneath the car, and I've got a little more time on my hands. So what I've done is pulled the T-tops off, popped the hood, and opened the doors as I was just researching around, what's the proper way to jack this thing up. Some people were saying that it's best if you have that stuff at least unlatched, and so I've gone ahead and done that. So next thing I'm going to do is, now that I've got the time, I think I'm going to go for this all at once, try to get the spark plugs replaced and the power steering pump, because that power steering pump overnight leaked a ton of fluid onto my garage floor, and so I'm just tired of refilling that, tired of it leaking oily crap all over the floor. So I'm going to try and get after that today. If I can't fix it up this afternoon, I won't be able to drive anywhere, so there's my motivation to get it done. So I'm a little intimidated to actually put this thing up on jack stands and get underneath it, just because I've changed plenty of tires before where you put up just one corner of the car and quickly change the tire, but I've never really, for an extended period of time, put a car on jack stands and bend underneath the car. And so I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure I do that right to keep myself safe. But with that all being said, let's get after it. So in this car, the battery is behind the driver's seat, so I'm gonna fold that forward. I've already opened this up. Now, the previous owner installed a little bit of an accessory here for charging your phone. And so that's just like basically a cigarette lighter port that he clipped onto the battery. So I want to disconnect the battery since I'm going to be working underneath the hood with all kinds of different stuff today. And so I'm just got a wrench here, and I'm going to I couldn't fit my socket on this, so I'm going to see if I can break this terminal loose just using this adjustable wrench. If I can get it on there. All right, so I got the battery disconnected using that adjustable wrench. It wasn't as easy as I would have hoped. I mean, I wish it would have just been on the top so I could just ratchet it off. But anyway, the little piece that holds the ground terminal on was pretty stripped and rounded out. So it was difficult, but I eventually got it loose. And then to double check that it was really disconnected, I put my key in and turned it, just make sure none of the lights or anything would come on, and put it out of the way where it's not going to touch or complete the circuit. So I should be safe while working on the car now. So the next step is to jack this thing up in the air and put it on jack stands. I've got the car in park. I locked the e-brake on. I've got the doors shut but not latched. They're just out of my way. And then I went ahead and chalked off the back wheels with a little triangular wheel chalk so that the car, isn't going to roll or go anywhere while it's up in the air, or the front end's up in the air anyway. And so I got myself under the car on the side rail, and I can see where I want to put the jack stands, but I'm struggling with, there's really no central place to jack the front of this car up. Some people will use, I guess, the cross member across the front, and that seems like it's a bad idea. Mine's already actually bent. I can see where someone else jacked the car up that way and caused some damage to it, and what I was reading online was saying don't do that. It bends pretty easily. There's some evidence of that. So what I may end up having to do, I don't love this option, but I only have one jack, is I'm going to jack up by the front passenger side, put a jack stand under it, pull the jack, and then go over and jack up the driver's side and put a jack stand under that, release the jack, and then the whole front end will be up. I wish I could do it symmetrically, lift the whole car at once, but it looks like I'm gonna have to go corner and then the other corner. I've got the car on 2 jack stands. I also just left the jack just barely touching the frame. I didn't want it really jacked up, so the weight is still mostly on the jack stand over here, but just as a little bit of a safety measure, I've got the jack under there with very little upward pressure so the car doesn't fall far before it hits the jack if it did somehow come off. I've given this a good solid shake from the front and the sides, and it feels solid on there. I gotta be honest, I'm still a little nervous going under this thing, but it does feel solid. Both jack stands are in place. Both rear wheels are chalked off back there. Car's in park with the e-brake on, and so we should be good. But still a little bit of heebie-jeebies about placing myself under there. I mean, the wheels are still on too, so even if it did, with all that in place, manage to fall somehow, the suspension should stop it, and I think I should have a little room between my body and the car if I'm laying on my back underneath there. So time to open the hood all the way up. It's just been unlatched up to this point, but let's open this all the way up and see about changing these spark plugs. Now, if I'm going to be doing the swap of the power steering pump, I might start there because that's going to involve unplugging a whole lot of other stuff. But I think for today, with as new as this all is, I may just do spark plugs and save that for another day when I have a little bit of help from a friend who knows more than me. A couple of things while I've got the car up like this. I don't know how well it shows on camera, but these lines with the yellow tags are quite oily, greasy, and I think that is involved, at least, in my power steering leak. Underneath here you can see directly below them already, since I've had the car parked out here, a couple drops of whatever's coming out that power steering system. So I'm not sure where exactly the leak is occurring. That's something I'm really excited to have fixed. While we're under here as well, let's see, this way, I'm gonna tap it on the screen. What's currently center screen is that, I guess that's what they're calling a cross member. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. Right there, and you can see where it's dented upward, where it's actually been bent a little bit from someone jacking the car up by putting a jack right there. It's really not advisable, so I don't plan to do anything about that, but that may be part of my alignment issue I'm having where the car pulls right, but I'm thinking that's what happens when you jack right there versus on the side like I was doing. This is the first spark plug I pulled from the car. So here's the process. I basically got myself under the car and just followed the first spark plug wire I could find. I kind of yanked on it a little bit, just kind of jiggled it. It came out fairly easy. Once that was out, I actually was looking up and I was like, oh, now that I know where this is, I could probably access it easier from above the car. So I actually came out from under it and just used my hand underneath where I knew it was, the spark plug was, now that I had the wire off of it, and found it, and then fit my spark plug socket over it, and immediately realized, you know, the benefits of a breaker bar. I didn't have enough leverage to pull on it with this short little socket set that I've got. So what I ended up doing, since I don't have a breaker bar and I didn't want to just drive and go get one or something, is I took the extension, the little extender for my socket set, and I plugged into it one of the sockets that's just a little bit bigger than the end of my handle. And so I was able to put that on there and sort of extend the leverage I have. It was a little wobbly in the center, but that got it started, and as soon as it broke loose, it was really easy. I was able to finish pulling it out. This is quite rusty along the outside, as you can see. Here you can see how very small the gap is on this. It actually doesn't look very worn. I'm not sure that this is so old. I don't like the rust I'm seeing, so I'm going to replace it. But this is a teeny tiny little gap on it, which could be giving me a weak spark, and that might be part of why I'm having issues. So I'm excited to one at a time. This is going to be a bigger job, just since it's my first time doing it. But I'm going to put a new spark plug in there, patch everything back up, and just make my way around and do the other 7. And just for reference, here is the old spark plug I just pulled out of the car and the new one. Most notably, look at the difference in gap between the two. Let me see if I can get these to hold up. So my new one is properly gapped to 0.45 or 0.045 or 0.048, and this new one, or the old one, is obviously much tighter than that. Other than that, they're very similar looking. Obviously the rust, you can see this discoloration on the ceramic, I'm told, is actually not a bad thing at all. It's totally fine. But I'm excited to get this new one in there and see how the car runs. So here is spark plug number 2 pulled from the car. You can see it's dirty. It's not in horrible shape. I don't see, oh wait. Yeah, I don't see any cracks around the ceramic, but again, I see very tight gapping and just generally grimy. I mean, this doesn't look like it's in too bad a shape. We're gonna go ahead and replace all of them anyway. But now I'm starting to get the hang of getting under there, getting these out. So this is kind of fun. A good bit of effort later, and here are 7 of the 8 spark plugs from the original spark plugs anyway. You can see they're in various states of rust and dirty. This one's really quite, almost looks burnt up. I'm not sure what happened to make that one so much darker than the rest. As for the 8th one, I actually sheared it in half when I was trying to pull it from the car. Luckily, it sheared above and left this hex section completely intact. So I was able to basically just use a screwdriver to punch this out of my socket puller and then get after it as normal. I mean, it didn't really matter that the ceramic was gone, it's trash anyway, but that was an interesting little moment where the thing totally broke off. The reason that happened is that each of these spark plugs was a little bit of an adventure on its own. So that one happened to be right down here below this exhaust. I think that's a header. But it was at an angle where this thing, whatever this is, was in the way. I couldn't quite get my tool in here easily. So what I tried was I put on a universal joint and an extender, and I was pulling, and it was at a weird enough angle that so much of the force was not, just rotating. It was pulling on it to the side that the thing just snapped right in half. And what I learned from that was it was so much easier to just put on the socket, then get my tool into place, rather than having them both connected and just trying to plug it in right off the bat. That was a thing that I used throughout the other side many times too. So the driver's side, so pistons 1, 3, 5, and 7 were actually fairly straightforward. I'm glad I started on this side. The 4 of them are basically just along here. They're not terribly hard to get to even from the top. I really don't need to jack the car up for the next time I do these 4. Now over here on the passenger side, things were a little more difficult. So there's an additional plate. There are 2 of the spark plugs up here for pistons 2 and 4. That made it a little harder to get my hand and tools down in there, but I was able to do it. And then down here, there's actually this little bit of, I don't know if this silver part is heat shielding or what that is, but it had those 2 wing nuts, which were pretty rusted in place. I was able to get those off. And then I had to get under the car and undo another bolted screw and just pull that completely off. And then the other 2 spark plugs were here and here. They weren't terribly difficult to get to, although this silver piece is, those wing nuts are connecting to 2 little plates. One of those plates was too in the way for cylinder 8, the final one. So what I had to do was grab just a regular old adjustable wrench and bend. All right, I'm not sure where that video got cut off. I got a phone call, but this car is so pretty. Oh my God. Okay, so here it is up on the stands. We're all finished. I think what I was talking about was the cylinder number 8. I had to bend a little piece to get to what I needed to get to, but I was able to do that with a wrench. Got my spark plug changed, just slow and steady. Put everything back together, and this little cable came off as well, just because it's under a little bit of tension, and I bumped it with my arm, but I got it put right back on. So I think everything is back the way it was. So here's my plan of attack, is I'm going to start, just reverse the jack process that I did last time. So this jack is already in place, so I'm gonna just pump it up a little higher so that the jack is actually supporting the weight of the car, and slide the jack stand out. And then let this side down slowly, then come around to the other side, do the same process, use the jack to transfer the weight of the car from the jack stand to the jack itself, pull the jack stand out, gently let it down, and then I'll reconnect the battery, close the hood, close all the car up, and start it up. And I cannot wait to see how it feels with these brand new spark plugs, and the timing has been fixed. All right, so the car is back on the ground, which feels good. All the tools are put away. Hood is closed, door is closed, battery is reconnected. This was a lot of fun. I feel like I learned a lot. It was pretty intimidating getting underneath the car without having somebody who's done this before to sort of just fact check the way I was going about it, but it seems to have worked. You know, it read up a little bit, and I'm glad. Feel a little less nervous about it now. It was a long process, a lot longer than I think it should be in the future, or that it would have been for someone more experienced, but I just felt like I persisted. And you know, when things were tricky, each one of those spark plugs was tricky in a different way. None of them were totally crazy though. I just kind of stuck with it, and I feel really proud to have had that done, and I cannot wait to get this car started up. So without further ado, startup was a little funny. I'll say, unfortunately, the car feels like it's actually rocking a little worse than before. So here's my guess, is one of the 8 spark plugs, or maybe more, but I may not have gotten the cable on just right, so I might have a faulty connection on one of them. But I don't know if you can see the steering wheel. Shaking pretty bad. That's a bummer. I'm gonna give it a little bit of a drive and see how it feels. We'll see. It's definitely idling a lot more quietly, which is different. I'm not hearing that like pinging. There was something weird going on before that is no longer happening, so that's happy. But I'll say, just the rumbling, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I'm gonna drive it around a little bit and see how it feels. It might be a bad idea, just in case it is misfiring or something. But I mean, each of those did feel snug. They were gapped properly, so we'll just see. The sound is better. The feeling is just a little worse. So I'm checking to see if it's gonna rain, because I want to drive this thing with the T-tops off. So I have good news. I think it must have just been like a little bit of a break-in period or initial startup thing, because this thing started up great. After a couple of minutes driving around, everything sorted itself out. It's idling smoother, it drives smoother, it feels nicer, sounds better. I don't know how much that's in my head, but I feel like I can really feel a difference. and I'm no longer worried about something being wrong. The idling, that hum or that like whoomp, 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 died down after just a couple of minutes driving. I was able to start it up just now, and it's settled right to 700 RPM. It's idling perfectly there. It's idling smoother when it's in gear, which is always something it's really struggled to do. Is I often put it into park whenever I'm sitting still, because when it tries to idle in gear, it'll sometimes peter out. If the RPMs want to dip so low, it feels smoother, it feels more consistent there. So overall, that's just really good news.